aan die minister van Landbou gerig oor die
al Noord- en Oos-Vrystaat, maar
To provide better financial reward for the farmer, your policy will automatically
In today's news, agricultural organisations Agri-SA and Agbi say they welcome government's announcement on Tuesday regarding a temporary lowering of the fuel levy. This comes after various agricultural organisations and political parties put pressure on government to lower the levy to soften the impact of the recent fuel hikes. Treasury said in a statement that the general fuel levy would be temporarily decreased to R3 per litre for the period from 1 April to 5 May. This brought the official increase in the fuel price to R3.06 per litre for petrol and R7.37 per litre for diesel. Fuel, especially diesel, is one of the biggest expenses in agricultural production and accounts for between 12 and 18% of production cost. Agri-SA and Agbi said in a joint statement that government's intervention brought immediate relief, but that the agricultural sector is facing numerous other challenges that demand intervention. They called on government to also lower the Road Accident Fund levy temporarily and to consider a diesel rebate to the tune of 100% for primary users. They also asked for greater transparency with regard to the national fuel supply and stock levels. Volgens 'n verklaring deur Graan SA en Vertasa het die konflik in die Midde-Ooste en die ontwrigting in die wêreldolievoorrade ook 'n enorme effek op kunsmispryse. Corneille Lou, Graan SA se hoofekonoom, verduidelik.
Kunsmis as 'n produksie-inset maak ongeveer tussen 30 en 50% van 'n graan- en oliesade produsent se lopende produksiekoste rekening uit. En meer as 80% van ons kunsmisbehoefte in Suid-Afrika moet ons invoer. So ons is blootgestel in wat in internasionale markte met kunsmis gebeur. Wat met die konflik gebeur is dat ons gesien het dat oliepryse bo $100 per vat verhandel en olie beïnvloed natuurlike gaspryse. Natuurlike gaspryse is die sleutelhulpbron om stikstofkunsmis te vervaardig. En stikstofkunsmis is een van die sleutel nutriënte wat nodig is in graan- en oliesade produksie. En is dit 'n bekommernis dat hierdie hoër kunsmispryse die winsgewendheid van veral wintergraanprodusente kan beïnvloed wat op die voorhand is van hulle plantseisoen.
En dit was Corneille Lou van Graan SA. Die Suid-Afrikaanse Veterinêre Vereniging en die Herkouer Veterinêre Vereniging van Suid-Afrika het hierdie week 'n regskrywe aan die minister van Landbou gerig oor die sogenaamde artikel 10 skema vir voorkomende inenting teen bek en klou seer. Die organisasies sê onder meer dit is uiters belangrik dat die skema regsgeldig en prakties uitvoerbaar moet wees. Die skrywe volg op 'n vroeëre regskrywe waarin die organisasies aanvanklik op 'n verouderde weergawe van die konsepskema gereageer het. Die Nasionale Rooi Vleisprodusente Organisasie het in sy kommentaar op die aanvanklike skrywe gesê die meeste van die probleemareas wat aanvanklik deur SAFA en Rovasa uitgelig is reeds in nuwer weergawes van die konsepdokument aangespreek. Die organisasie meen egter dat die jongste skrywe ook geldige kommentare bevat en dat die regering die skema as 'n saak van dringendheid moet finaliseer. Ons hoor wat Dr. Frikkie Maree, hoofbestuurder van die RPO, hieroor sê.
SAFA en Rovasa, nadat hulle verlede week met hofaksie gedreig het oor die voorgestelde artikel 10 skema, dit nou weer hierdie week met 'n amptelike brief teruggetrek en sekere voorwaardes gestel waaraan die artikel 10 moet voldoen volgens hulle. Ek dink die eerste skrywe waarin hulle met hofaksie gedreig het, was regverdig, aangesien die dokument wat ingedien was by die hof en waarop hulle aanslag baseer het, grootliks foutief was. Dit was 'n dokument wat in ontwikkeling was en daar was nog 'n klomp foute in. Verder voel ek dat die nuwe skrywe wat sekere voorwaardes stel ook nie onregverdig is nie. Feit van die saak is, hierdie artikel 10 moet baie dringend gefinaliseer word, sodat ons entstowwe kan uitrol, die landse diere kan ent, en sodat die privaat sektor daarbey betrokke kan wees. Ja, daar's 'n klomp partye wat in ag geneem moet word, maar ons moet ook wag vir 'n finale dokument deur die komitees wat daaraan werk, voordat dit regtig vir sirkulasie kan uitgaan. Anders gaan daar net ongelooflik baie terugvoer wees oor goed wat nie reg is nie. Die tyd raak egter min wat die hof aangedui het en wanneer hierdie ding gepubliseer moet word, en ons moet dringend terugvoer kry van die departement sodat hierdie dokument gefinaliseer kan word en dat die skema in gunste sal wees vir produsente, veeartse en die res van die bedryf wat moet betrokke wees by die suksesvolle uitrol van hierdie back and closure en stofbeweging.
The National Crop Estimates Committee said in its latest report that the expected commercial maize crop has been set at just over 16.5 million tonnes, which is 2.37% more than the previous forecast. The three main maize production areas, the Free State, Mpumalanga and Northwest, are expected to produce 81% of the 2026 crop. The production forecast of white maize is also 2.92% higher than the previous forecast, while the production forecast for yellow maize is 7.750 million tonnes, which is 1.75% more than the previous forecast. With regard to other summer crops, the production estimate for both sunflower seed and soybeans was increased. The expected groundnut crop was set at 69,360 tonnes, which is 6.32% higher than the previous forecast. The production forecast for sorghum and dry beans was also higher. The next forecast for the summer production season will be available on 23 April, along with the winter crop planting intentions. The Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa has released its estimates of the volume of citrus available for export. The organisation said in a press release that the estimates point to continued growth in the industry. Estimates of all varieties, excluding late mandarins, point to an increase of between 3 and 5%, which represents a total of between 210 and 215 million 15-kilogram cartons. The CEO of the association, Dr. Boitsoko Ntsabele, said while they are acutely aware of the uncertainties the industry faces with the conflict in the Middle East, everything possible will be done to limit the impact of these factors. They expect 45.9 million 15-kilogram cartons of lemons to be exported to key markets. This represents a 10% increase from last year's figure. The increase is due to a significant number of young trees coming into production in the Sunday Rivers Valley, as well as the Senwes region's recovery from hail damage in past seasons. Predictions show a figure of 30 million 15-kilogram cartons for navel oranges and 1.6% increase in the Valencia orange export crop. Grapefruit exports are estimated at 15.7 million 17-kilogram cartons, which represents a significant 16% increase. The citrus industry employs 140,000 people at farm level and is South Africa's largest agricultural export industry. Agri-Expo het verlede week rolspelers in die suiwelbedryf by die 2026 Suid-Afrikaanse suiwelkampioenskappe byeengesit buite Durban wil verwelkom. Vanjaar se 193ste kampioenskap van sy soort spog met 'n rits nuwe rekords. Altesaam 1227 produkte van 81 produsente is ingeskryf en deur 130 kenners beoordeel. Die kompetisie het ook vanjaar 20 vennote. Volgens Bruiten Milford, hoofbestuurder van Agri Expo, is al 4 hierdie syfers rekordgetalle. Die beoordeling het op 25 Maart met melk en roomys afgeskop, gevolg deur 'n tweede dag van kaas en botterbeoordeling, met yoghurt en gefermenteerde produkte wat op 27 Maart beoordeel is. 'n Totaal van 700 kase is beoordeel, die meeste nog in die kategorie. Die wenners word op 23 April by die Nederburg Wynlandgoed in die Parel aangekondig. Die kampioenskap sluit sowat 150 klasse vir suiwelprodukte in en nuwe klasse vanjaar sluit onder meer smoothies en kondensmelk in. Klaswenners word as SA kampioene aangewys, terwyl produkte van uitstaande gehalte by die gesogte kwaliteitmerk bekroon word. 90 small-scale farmers from Northwest and Limpopo recently graduated after completing a small farmer development program at the University of Pretoria. The program was presented by the Faculty of Veterinary Science in conjunction with Sibanye Stillwater, and the graduation ceremony was held at the Onderstepoort campus. One of the main goals of the program is to equip farmers with skills that will ensure healthy and more productive herds. The ultimate aim is to assist these farmers to participate in formal export markets. According to Professor Vinnie Naidu, the Dean of the faculty, the program has already borne fruit with herds that are much healthier and market ready. The program was funded via the university's Enterprise at UP program. And that is today's news.
Ja, goeiemôre. Ja, is lekker om weer te gesels. Hierdie afgelope week het daar plekke baie goeie reën gekry, amper sê ek swaar reën, veral Noord- en Oos-Vrystaat, maar dit het oor groot dele van die land wat dit gereën het. Nie al oral so swaar nie, die meeste van die dele het maar redelike ligte reën gehad, maar ons het gesien in die Noord-Kaap, Oos-Kaap, KwaZulu-Natal en selfs dele van die Wes-Kaap wat 'n klompie reën gekry het. Maar soos ons sê, gedeeltes hier oor die sentrale dele redelik swaar reën wat voorgekom het. As ons kyk na die volgende tyd, hierdie volgende week of 2, dan is hier weer reën hier van die naweek of net voor die naweek oor Namibië en die westelike dele van die land. So hier dele van die Noord-Kaap, selfs dele van die Wes-Kaap, Weskus gedeeltes wat 'n klompie reën kan kry. Dit lyk so hier in die orde van 5 na 10 mm, maar dit lyk ten minste of die baie droë dele soos Holliston, Sutherland en daardie gedeeltes 'n klompie reën kan kry. En dit kan ook uitbrei meer na die Kaapse suidkus gedeeltes toe. Tuinroete kan 'n klompie reën kry en dan lyk dit selfs vir dele van die Oos-Kaap ook nog reën. Daar kan enkele baie verder noord voorkom, maar die grootste reën behoort meer oor die westelike en suidelike dele van die land te wees. So ja, vir hierdie tyd van die jaar, oor die grootste deel van die land lyk dit eintlik baie mooi. Ek was verlede week hier in die Karoo gewees, in die Noord-Kaap, en dit is seker van die mooiste wat ek dit in baie jare gesien het. So ja, dit lyk eintlik baie goed.
In the following discussion, we focus on stud breeding with Kobus Bester. He is breed director for the Simbra Cattle Breeders Association of Southern Africa. Kobus, how does stud breeding add value to a farming operation?
Good day, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Stud breeding should definitely enable you to add value, but it's dependent on a couple of things. First of all, you need to decide, you need to make the correct decision. Are you interested in return on ego, or are you interested in return on investment? And therefore, it's important that you understand that animals with a greater intrinsic value will definitely render a higher return. And that is what we should focus on. So it's really a matter of working with animals that have the ability to constantly give you a higher return than what is expected within the norm. That's also part of the definition of what is animal improvement. It is to focus on the current herd that you have, their ability to provide better financial reward should be higher than the animals that they were bred out of. And as long as you can implement that, you're on the winning path.
So breeding does improve your profitability.
Definitely, it should.
What support comes with being a stud breeder?
First of all, you have to focus on what are my goals, what are my objectives. And you can only do so efficiently once you've been able to really quantify the specifics that you would like to see as part of your objectives. Therefore, you have to set out specific goals. And some of the things that are really important then in that regard is what we often refer to as the 3 Ps. We look at the phenotype of the animal. The animal has to be well adapted. The animal must be able to adapt to its environment and also to adapt on the farm of the new buyer of that animal. So that's one of the first Ps. Then you need to make sure that the pedigree of the animal will give you an expectation in terms of how you would expect the offspring to be like. So a proper pedigree, a proper maintained and well-recorded pedigree will add in really assist you in being predictable. So that is the other P, the pedigree, and then performance data. We are living in an era where information is absolutely crucial, and we need to be able to find the right answers by analyzing the correct set of data. And within a stud operation, whether you like it or not, you have to do data recording, because that is what is going to put you on the next level.
Kobus, thank you. But what are some important factors to consider when it comes to stud breeding?
First of all, you need to understand that you should have a specific goal in mind. Also, when I'm talking about the goal, what it is that you would like to achieve, but more important, you need to have a good look at what or who is your market. And when you look at the market, it's no use just to provide something to the market. You need to provide something that is special and something that is really worthwhile to the marketplace. We're no longer focused on just driving turnover. Turnover is not profit. To be sustainable, you have to make sure that what I do can be farmed off the veld, utilizing as many natural resources as possible. And in doing so, you should be able to increase your profitability. Then things like how you use your EBVs and specifically indexes rather than EBVs, because the EBV makes you focus on a single trait, whereas as soon as you move towards indexes, that means now you follow a more holistic approach to really achieve specific objectives. And like I said, it's about being sustainable, it's about being profitable, it's about providing a product in the marketplace that there is a definite need for. For example, you should consider perhaps something like improving on carcass quality. I'm not talking about meat quality now, I'm talking about carcass quality. Now, one of the things that I can mention, for example, is the fact that by focusing on carcass quality, you can get away to operate a feedlot without adding beta-agonists to the ration and still deliver high quality, high value carcasses with an excellent retail beef yield. And that is those kind of things that you will be able to do a bit better if you focused and structured within a stud breeding setup.
How does one become a stud breeder?
We need to understand that stud breeders are operating within the Act on Animal Improvement to start off with. Therefore, you need to join a society that's already registered in terms of the Animal Improvement Act. And then, for example, with Simbra, we made it quite simple. You simply apply to become a member. But then also, often people think about the huge capital outlay that you have to make. Now, within Simbra, as with many of the other breeds, we've got a foundation herd book that you can include where it means that you can go and have a look at the type of animals that you have. If they are of a Simbra type, you can include those in your breeding program, which animals you then introduce to a breed inspector. The inspector will assess the animals, and if they comply within the phenotypical breed standards of Simbra, for example, then you will be able to include those animals as coom animals, and then you follow a well-structured scientific program whereby you put on those animals registered bulls, and then you can develop out of that a registered herd, and by doing so you can add value and you can increase your intrinsic value of the herd, but you can also really produce something that you will be able to market at a premium.
Oh, that's all about stud breeding. Joining me today was Kobus. He is breed director for the Simbra Cattle Breeders Association of Southern Africa. Risk is the likelihood of damage or loss. Peril, on the other hand, is the misfortune, accident or disaster that may occur. When the probability of an event and the severity of its consequences are considered together, people naturally start seeking protection. Insurance then emerges as the solution. Now, Andries Wiese of Hollard joins us again in studio today to talk about important insurance matters. Lovely having you in studio again, Andries. How has insurance changed and evolved through the ages?
Good day, Lisa. Insurance, like many things, changes as time goes by, and I feel terribly old when I have to refer to the previous century, but in the latter part of the previous century, insurance tended to be a one-trick pony. So if I wanted to insure my car, I would insure my car. If I wanted to insure my house, I would insure my house. And then insurers and clients together became a bit lazy and realized so many things happen that maybe we should combine these risks. And it then progressed to a sort of a combined policy where we would add a bunch of different perils, so water and hail and fire and lightning and all of that, and you would have a single policy for that, which was very comfortable for the consumer, but also for the insurer, because you had a package and it was done deal. But as time progresses and as technology changes and as risks evolve and as the world changes, it's become increasingly necessary again to be able to isolate certain perils and say, I am particularly concerned about lightning, or I am particularly concerned about foot and mouth disease, or I am particularly concerned about my sheep being frozen to death because of the weather or because they've just been shorn, or whatever the case might be. So we're finding a move back to having simplified single type of risk policies, which has a dual advantage for the client as well. On the one hand, it's very clear what is insured, what is covered, what is happening. So I know it's lightning that is covered, just to use an example. That's the one advantage of it. But the second part is I'm not paying as a client for risks and for perils and for potential occurrences that don't affect me. If I'm staying on the top of a mountain, I have no fear whatsoever for flood. There's no risk for it. Why should I be paying for it? And that's the sort of thinking that's happening. So as time progressed, all that happened is that we actually went back to the old days where you can now tailor make and pick and choose what you're looking for as opposed to having to take everything because everything is offered. If you buy 5 ice creams, you get a 6th one free. You only have 5 that you need. Why have 6?
I've heard the words hybrid solutions. What exactly does this refer to? And give us some examples in a farming context.
A hybrid solution is actually just a combination of 2 things, or 3 things, or a variety of things. And it's exactly what we've just spoken about. A hybrid solution now allows me the opportunity to put together a number of individual perils, insure against them in a tailor-made solution for me as an individual farmer. I farm with grapes and sheep. I have absolutely no intention or need to insure a combine harvester or to look at various other perils that aren't applicable in my farming operation. There's a lovely Afrikaans saying that says, elke vrou soen sy vrou op sy eie manier. And farming is the same. No 2 farmers, even if they farm with the same commodity, do it in the same manner. Why should they have the same solution?
Talk to us about risk management in farming and a producer's own responsibility.
It's a very important point. And I think we often mistake it and start a blaming game, irrespective of who's involved. There are 2 factors to it. And the one is that there's certain legal obligations on individual farmers, individual businessmen, insurers as well. And a very basic example of that is you cannot allow an underage, unlicensed child to drive a vehicle on a public road. It's just, that's the law. So we need to play within those spaces. But then insurance policies worldwide have an inherent care requirement for the insured. So for the farmer, your policy will automatically have a due care clause in it, which basically just says, Lisa, you've got to take care and do your utmost to not have something happen. Make sure that you've taken the necessary precautions. An example would be, again, very simplistic. If I drive my bakkie to town, or I park it at home in the evening, and I park it on the pavement, unlocked, I am probably not going to find it tomorrow morning. Whereas if I take that same bakkie and I put it inside, in the garage, lock it up, etc., etc., that's just due care. So all it means is that a farmer and any individual client has to be careful and take the necessary precautions. In a farming context, if we're talking about cold spells coming, I know it's coming. I've just shorn my sheep. I'm not going to push them out into the field and have them rain wet and probably freeze because of that. I'm going to put them inside a shed. I'm going to not shear them, whatever the case might be. So a due care requirement is something that farmers very often mistake and say, well, I'm now insured. I can carry on with life and I don't have to worry. That's not true. You still have a basic responsibility to take the necessary precautions.
Andries, if I want to reduce my insurance policy without cancelling it, how do I do that?
There are a number of ways to do it, to achieve it. And the first thing that people often forget is a lot of people insuring things that they actually don't own anymore. They don't have. You will be amazed when we start looking at individual clients and we say tractor ABC. And he says, oh no, I sold that 4 years ago. But he's been paying insurance for 4 years on that particular tractor. It's stupid things such as that. Buildings that are no longer occupied have been broken down. I had a vast store of fertilizer at some point in time, which I insured. I've used up all the fertilizer. So a lot of unnecessary things being insured is the one part. Make sure that you're insuring what you have, what you need to insure. Second part is what we've spoken about. Am I insuring relevant things? If something is not applicable in my world, why am I buying insurance for it? It's not going to happen. Never say never. But on a likelihood of Will it? Probably not. So make sure that you're actually insuring what you're hoping to insure again. And the third thing that is very important is people in these days, yes, you can insure everything, by all means. Go for it and pay your premium and carry on with life. But you've got to ask yourself, am I able, in my personal capacity or in my business's capacity, to absorb a particular loss? And a very good example of that is, if my watch were to be stolen, I can probably go to town and go and buy myself a cheap 20, 30, 50 rand watch, whatever the case might be. But if my shed burns down, the problem is much bigger, and I need to facilitate that. So why am I insuring watches if I'm quite capable of doing that in my normal cash flow scenario? Why am I not insuring the big ticket items, the critical to the business items, those things that potentially, if something were to go wrong and I cannot replace it, could stop my business fully? If I'm a fruit exporter and my pack house goes down, I have a very real problem. If I am a sheep farmer and my one tractor, it has a flat tire, it's not the end of the world. And that's the sort of discussion one has to have with yourself. The other thing as well is we have to appreciate that insurance, in as much as it's an enabler and it's a safeguard and it's a mitigator for risk within the farming environment, it also has holes in. As a safety net, it's got holes in. You cannot cover for every eventuality in all circumstances at all times. And understand that. Understand that it is merely a tool. It is merely one part of my risk management plan, my financial planning, but also of my risk management piece. It is not the total solution. And as long as you understand that and utilize it accordingly, you'll probably be very cash effective. And the last important part, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is get professional, proper help.
Advice.
Get the right advice. Get a broker to assist you.
And that broker will probably ask you annually to relook whatever you are insured for.
If he's not doing it, find another one.
Andries, thank you very much. Andries Wiese from Hollard talking to us about insurance, what matters, what you need to do every year. And as he said, do not insure what you do not need to insure.